Summer 1462. Imagine this. You are an Ottoman soldier, a veteran of countless battles, part of an army that has swept across continents, crushing empires, conquering even the formidable walls of Constantinople. You are marching into a small principality called Wallachia, a task that should take mere days, a swift suppression of a rebel prince. Then the air changes. It is a scent first, not the usual dust of the march, nor the wood smoke of distant villages. This is different, a foul, clinging aroma of decay, of something profoundly wrong, something you cannot quite name, yet every instinct screams danger. Your mighty column, usually relentless, falters. The scouts, normally swift and silent, have stopped, frozen in place. And then, as you crest a low hill near the capital city, you see it. A forest, but not of trees. A forest of human beings. 20,000 of them, perhaps more.
Your brothers, your comrades, men you once fought beside, now impaled on wooden stakes, their bodies lifted grotesquely into the air. They are arranged in chillingly perfect, geometric rows that stretch as far as the eye can see, a macabre harvest under the summer sun. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and black, picked clean by carrion birds. Others, more recently added to this horrific landscape, are still moving, still grieving, still screaming. Their cries, hoarse and desperate, carry on the breeze, a symphony of suffering that chills the blood of even the most hardened warrior. Your sultan, the formidable man who conquered the Byzantine Empire, who has seen more death and destruction than any other living ruler, takes one long, silent look. He says nothing, but the message is clear. He turns his entire army around. The most powerful military force on earth retreats, not in defeat on a battlefield, but in utter horror before this unimaginable display.
What kind of mind, you wonder, creates such a thing? And here is the part that should truly terrify you. This was not madness. This was strategy. Cold, precise, utterly calculated, and horrifyingly effective. The story you think you know about Vlad the Impaler, it is a lie. Not because the gruesome acts did not happen, but because the truth behind them is so much more disturbing. This is the full account of how one man weaponized human suffering with such devastating precision that it fundamentally altered the course of empires. By the end, you will understand why the real horror was not what he did to bodies, but what he did to minds. Let us start with a question few ever dare to ask. What could possibly break a human being so completely, so utterly, that they become capable of such an atrocity? The year is 1442. Vlad is just 11 years old. His father, Vlad II Dracula, known as Vlad the Dragon, has just made a deal. Not a metaphorical one, mind you, but a very real pact with a powerful entity, Sultan Murad II of the Ottoman Empire. The terms are simple, yet brutal. Vlad II gets to keep his fragile throne in Wallachia. In exchange, he hands over his two youngest sons as hostages, living collateral to guarantee his loyalty. So, young Vlad and his younger brother, Radu, are torn from their home, their childhood abruptly ending, and delivered into the very heart of the formidable Ottoman Empire. They are not thrown into dank dungeons as common prisoners. No, they are received as guests in the opulent palaces at Edirne and later at Amasya. They are given fine clothes, a rigorous education, and intensive military training. They are taught Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, and the tenets of the Quran. On the surface, it seems like a rare privilege, an opportunity for intellectual and martial development. But here is what the history books often gloss over.
the chilling reality behind the gilded cage. This was no ordinary education. This was psychological warfare, meticulously designed and executed. Vlad spent his formative years, from the age of 11 to 17, observing his captors. He watched them perfect the brutal art of empire building. He studied how the Ottomans wielded fear as a primary instrument of governance. He witnessed public executions, not merely as punishments for crimes, but as carefully staged spectacles designed to traumatize entire populations into absolute submission. He learned, with every fiber of his being, that terror, when applied with surgical precision, was far more effective, far more destructive than any army on a battlefield. And he learned something else, a crushing, indelible truth. He was utterly powerless.
While his younger brother, Radu, adapted, even forming an unlikely, close friendship with the Sultan's own son Mehmet, Vlad refused to bend. Ottoman court records reveal frequent punishments for his defiance. Some accounts suggest he was beaten, perhaps even tortured. The exact, agonizing details are lost to the sands of time, but one thing is certain: something fundamental, something core to his humanity, broke inside him during those 6 agonizing years. Or perhaps, more accurately, something crystallized. He developed what modern psychologists might term a severe persecution complex, combined with an obsessive, unyielding need for control. But he did not simply succumb to it, he channeled it. Every punishment he endured, he studied. Every torture technique he witnessed, he memorized. He was, piece by piece, building a mental arsenal, an encyclopedia of suffering that would one day be unleashed upon the world.
In 1448, after 6 long years of forced captivity, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia. He was a hardened 17-year-old. Just 2 months later, tragedy struck again, swift and brutal. His father was assassinated by rival boyars, the treacherous Wallachian nobility, who constantly played both sides, shifting loyalties between the Ottomans and the Hungarians. His older brother, Mircea, was captured and, in a horrifying act, buried alive. Vlad was alone, completely surrounded by enemies, backed by nobody. And here is where the story truly begins its dark descent. He did not simply desire revenge. He wanted to remake his entire world, to cleanse it in the image of his profound trauma. He would take everything the Ottomans had taught him about the strategic application of terror and refine it into something they had never, in their wildest nightmares, conceived. But first, he had to wait. For 6 more years, Vlad lived in exile, plotting, planning, meticulously studying military tactics and complex political maneuvering. And then, in 1450, with crucial Hungarian backing, he finally seized the Wallachian throne. The monster, forged in the fires of captivity and betrayal, was about to be born. Vlad's coronation feast in 1450 should have been a jubilant celebration. Instead, it became the chilling blueprint for everything that was to follow. He extended invitations to all the prominent boyar families, the very same nobility who had orchestrated his father's murder and buried his brother alive. Hundreds of them arrived, resplendent in their finest clothes, believing they were there to pledge their loyalty to the new prince, to secure their own positions in the shifting political landscape. The great hall was lavishly decorated, wine flowed freely, laughter echoed. Then, in the middle of the feast, Vlad rose. He asked a simple, seemingly innocuous question. "How many princes of Wallachia have you lived through?" The older boyars, preeming with self-importance, proudly answered, some claiming to remember 7, 10, even a dozen different rulers. They were bragging about their longevity, their political savvy, their uncanny ability to outlast any prince who dared to sit on the Wallachian throne. Vlad smiled, a slow, unsettling gesture. Then he gave an order.
Every boyar who had answered was arrested on the spot. But here is where you truly begin to see the methodical, calculating mind at work. He did not execute them immediately, not yet. Instead, he separated them into two distinct groups, based meticulously on their age and their perceived health. The older ones, the architects of his family's destruction, the most deeply entrenched in the old, treacherous power structure. They were impaled immediately, right outside the palace walls. Not quickly. The stakes, carefully selected and sharpened, were inserted with agonizing precision, designed to avoid vital organs, ensuring that these men would die slowly, agonizingly, over the course of hours, even days. Their screams provided the chilling soundtrack for what came next. The younger, stronger boyars and their families were stripped of their noble clothes and force-marched a brutal 50 miles north to the desolate ruins of Poenari Castle. There they were given a choice that was no choice at all: rebuild the fortress with their bare hands or die. For months they toiled relentlessly, hauling stones up the steep mountainside. They worked until their hands bled, until their fine clothing rotted off their bodies, until they collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Most died during the arduous construction. The few survivors were never the same, their spirits utterly broken.
Vlad had effectively erased the old nobility, completely dismantling the corrupt power structure that had made Wallachia weak and vulnerable. He replaced them with a new class, men and women who owed everything to him and lived in absolute terror of his displeasure. This was not merely revenge, it was a systematic, calculated restructuring of society. And it revealed something crucial about Vlad's terrifying psychology. He did not just want obedience. He wanted to break people so completely that obedience became their only possible response. But this was still domestic politics, confined within Wallachia's borders. What Vlad did next would send shockwaves across entire empires. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, yes, the same Mehmed who had been Vlad's childhood companion, his friend during those years of captivity, sent envoys to Wallachia. Their demand was clear: the annual tribute that Vlad's father had agreed to pay. The demand came with an additional insult, a power play. Vlad was to present himself personally in Constantinople to renew his oath of vassalage. The Ottoman envoys arrived, expecting the usual political theater, perhaps some negotiation, a counteroffer. What they received was a preview of hell. When they entered Vlad's court and, adhering to their genuine religious custom and Ottoman protocol, refused to remove their turbans, Vlad asked them to explain their tradition. They did so, probably relieved that he seemed interested in understanding rather than immediately offended. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he uttered words that must have frozen the blood in their veins. "I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Let me help you honor it forever." He ordered his guards to nail the turbans directly to their skulls. Think about the precision of that cruelty. He did not kill them. He mutilated them in a way that was both profoundly symbolically loaded and medically calculated to ensure they would survive the harrowing journey back to Constantinople. They were not just envoys anymore. They were walking messages, their screams echoing across the countryside as they fled back to the Sultan. When Mehmed received his envoys, these men he had sent in good faith, now permanently disfigured and driven half-mad by pain, he understood immediately. This was not the childhood friend he remembered. This was something new, something that had taken the Ottoman lessons in terror and evolved them into a form even the Ottomans themselves had never imagined. War was now inevitable. But before that war came, Vlad had more messages to send. Here is what most people do not understand about impalement. It was not just an execution. It was an intricate engineering project of suffering. The common image, a stake driven straight through the torso, would kill almost instantly.
That defeats Vlad's entire chilling purpose. Vlad's method was far more sophisticated, but infinitely more cruel. Based on contemporary medical analyses of descriptions and surviving Ottoman accounts, here is how it actually worked. First, the victim was laid face down. The stake, carefully selected, rounded at the tip, and thoroughly oiled, was inserted through the rectum. But here is the crucial detail. It was inserted at an angle specifically designed to miss all major organs and blood vessels. The victim was then slowly raised upright, and gravity did the rest. Over the course of hours, or sometimes even days, their own body weight would gradually force the stake upward through their torso. The path was meticulously calculated to avoid the heart, the lungs, and any major arteries. In some documented cases, the stake would eventually emerge through a shoulder or the chest, but the victim could remain alive for up to 3 days, enduring unimaginable agony. Why this method?
Because Vlad understands something that modern psychological warfare experts now confirm: witnessing prolonged suffering is exponentially more traumatizing than witnessing a quick death. A battlefield beheading is horrific, yes, but it is brief. Impalement, in Vlad's hand, was a performance that lasted days, complete with screams that could be heard across entire valleys, breaking the will of any who listened. But the physical act was only one component. The real genius, if one can even use such a perverted word, was in the staging. When Vlad impaled victims, he did it in public squares, along major roads, outside city gates, anywhere that would maximize visibility. He understood that word of mouth and rumor would multiply the psychological impact far beyond the actual number of victims. One impalement witnessed by 100 people would create 100 storytellers, each of whom would tell 100 more, spreading terror like a virus. And he refined the symbolism constantly.
Stakes were set at different heights based on rank. Peasants near the ground, nobles higher, the very highest reserved for enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual hierarchy that reinforced his message: everyone has a place in my world, and everyone will suffer according to their station. In some accounts, he even arranged impaled victims in precise geometric patterns: circles, stars, concentric rings. This was not random sadism, it was a deliberate demonstration of absolute control. It declared, "I possess so much power that I can turn human suffering into art." There exists a German pamphlet from 1462, admittedly propaganda, but based on eyewitness accounts from Saxon merchants in Wallachia, that describes Vlad dining among the impaled. He allegedly had a table set up in the middle of a field of stakes, where he ate his meals surrounded by dying men, seemingly enjoying the horrific experience.
Whether this specific incident happened exactly as described is debatable. But what is not debatable is the psychological message it sent. I am so far beyond your understanding of human behavior that your horror doesn't even touch me. The Saxons, who had their own complicated relationship with Vlad, circulated these pamphlets widely. They were some of the first mass-produced horror stories in European history, complete with crude but effective woodcut illustrations. These images spread across Europe and cemented Vlad's terrifying reputation. But here is the question nobody was asking. Was any of this working? Was terror actually an effective military strategy? Or was Vlad just a sadist with power, indulging in wanton cruelty? The answer came in the brutal summer of 1462, and it would prove that Vlad's methods were not just effective, they were devastatingly, chillingly so. Sultan Mehmed II had finally had enough. By early 1462, Vlad had not only refused to pay tribute, but had launched daring raids deep into Ottoman territory south of the Danube River. In one particularly brutal campaign, he crossed into Ottoman lands with a small, disciplined force and, according to his own chilling letter to the Hungarian king, killed over 23,000 people. He even meticulously kept a body count, categorizing victims by age and gender. Mehmed, who had conquered Constantinople at age 21, who had crushed rebellion after rebellion, who commanded the most powerful military machine on earth, decided to personally handle the Wallachian problem. In the spring of 1462, he assembled an army estimated between 60,000 and 90,000 men. The exact number is lost to history, but even conservative estimates put it at more than triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. This was not an invasion, it was intended as an extermination.
Vlad, by contrast, had maybe 100,000 to 30,000 men total, many of them peasant conscripts with minimal training. A conventional battle would be an absolute massacre for Wallachia. So Vlad did what he had been planning, meticulously since childhood. He refused to give them a conventional battle. As the Ottoman army entered Wallachia, they found nothing. Empty villages, poisoned wells, burned fields. Every potential source of food and water had been systematically destroyed. Vlad had ordered his own people to abandon their homes and retreat into the dense forests and mountains, taking their livestock with them, leaving behind a barren, silent land. The Ottoman supply lines stretched longer and longer, vulnerable and exposed. And then the night raids began. These were not typical skirmishes. Vlad had trained specialized units in brutal guerrilla warfare. Small groups of men, maybe 50 to 100, would strike Ottoman camps in the dead of night, killing sentries, setting fires, causing utter confusion, and then disappearing back into the darkness before any organized response could form. They targeted supply wagons, pack animals, ammunition stores. The goal was not to defeat the army in open combat, it was to make them paranoid, exhausted, and utterly demoralized. But the masterpiece, the ultimate stroke of psychological warfare, came on the night of June 17, 1462. Vlad had learned from captured Ottoman soldiers that Sultan Mehmed himself was camped near Targoviste, guarded by his personal elite janissaries. This was an opportunity that would never come again. Vlad personally led a force of about 10,000 men in what became known as the night attack. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the massive Ottoman camp with one terrifying objective: kill the Sultan.
Contemporary accounts describe absolute chaos. The Wallachians, many dressed in captured Ottoman uniforms and speaking enough Turkish to cause confusion, plunged the camp into pandemonium. They set fire to tents, stampeded horses, and specifically targeted the section of camp where the Sultan's pavilion stood. They came within mere yards of Mehmed himself. Some historians even believe Vlad and the Sultan were briefly in visual contact across the burning, screaming camp. But the janissaries held, forming an impenetrable defensive circle around their leader. After hours of close-quarters combat, Vlad realized he could not break through. He ordered a retreat, and his men vanished back into the night as suddenly and mysteriously as they had appeared. The Ottoman casualties were relatively light, perhaps 2,000 killed, though Ottoman sources often downplay such numbers for propaganda reasons. But the psychological damage was catastrophic. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, in the very middle of his own vast, supposedly invincible army, had nearly been killed by a vastly outnumbered enemy who struck from nowhere and disappeared like ghosts. Mehmed's commanders were rattled. His soldiers were exhausted, terrified, and they were still weeks away from Constantinople, marching through a dead, hostile landscape where every shadow might hide an enemy. Then they reached the capital, and they saw what Vlad had been preparing for them. No written description can fully capture what Mehmed's army encountered on the approach to Targoviste in late June 1462. But we can try. Imagine you are an Ottoman soldier. You have been marching for weeks through scorched earth, hungry, exhausted, and jumpy from constant night raids. You haven't seen the enemy in days. They've simply vanished. That should be a good sign, you tell yourself, but it feels like a trap. As you approach the Wallachian capital, the smell hits first. If you have ever smelt a dead animal rotting in summer heat, multiply that by thousands. Then add the sweet, sick-making odor of decomposing human flesh. It is so thick, so pervasive, you can taste it in your mouth, clogging your throat. Then you see the stakes. The first one, then 10, then 100, then you realize there is no end. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. Contemporary accounts say the field of impaled bodies extended for nearly 2 miles in length and over half a mile in width. Modern historians debate the exact number. Ottoman sources, probably minimizing for propaganda reasons, claim 10,000. Wallachian and Hungarian sources claim up to 20,000. The truth is probably somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 impaled bodies. But here is what truly makes your skin crawl. This was not random. The stakes were arranged in precise geometric patterns, concentric circles radiating out from the capital, height-ordered rows. In some sections, they form star patterns, visible from elevated ground. Vlad had spent weeks, possibly months, preparing this ghastly spectacle. He had captured Ottoman soldiers and sympathizers from earlier raids and border skirmishes. He had kept them alive specifically for this purpose. Some of the bodies had been dead for weeks, rotting in the merciless summer heat. Others had been impaled more recently, their flesh still fresh. And some, according to multiple sources, were still alive. The Byzantine chronicler Leonikos Chalkokondylis, who interviewed eyewitnesses, wrote that the moaning of the dying could be heard across the entire field. Some had been impaled for days, their bodies slowly consuming themselves, too weak to scream but still tragically conscious. The Ottoman troops, hardened veterans who had conquered cities and slaughtered countless enemies, reportedly began vomiting. Some refused to advance further, their wills broken. Others started deserting in the night, willing to risk execution rather than continue through this waking nightmare. And at the center, on the tallest stake of all, was Hamza Pasha, a high-ranking Ottoman commander captured in an earlier skirmish. His body, dressed in the remnants of his military finery, was positioned directly facing the route of the Sultan's approach. A personal, chilling message from Vlad to Mehmed. "This is what I do to your best men. Imagine what I will do to you." Sultan Mehmed II, remember, this is the man who watched Constantinople's mighty walls crumble under his cannons, who had ordered his own share of executions and massacres, reportedly stopped his horse and stared in silence for several minutes. Different sources record different versions of his response, but the most widely accepted comes from Chalkokondylis. It is not possible to deprive of his country a man who has done such great deeds. Who knows how to put his power to such use? A man who had done such things was worth much. This was not praise, it was a terrifying recognition. The Sultan was acknowledging that he was facing something he did not fully understand.
a mind that had taken Ottoman methods and evolved them into something even the Ottomans themselves could not match. The military situation was already deteriorating. Supply lines were overstretched. The scorched earth tactics had worked. The night raids had destroyed morale. The Sultan's own commanders were advising retreat. But the forest of the impaled was the psychological breaking point. It proved that conventional military thinking did not apply here. Vlad was not trying to win battles. He was trying to break minds. And it was working. Within days, Mehmed ordered a general retreat. He left a contingent under Vlad's younger brother, Radu, to continue harassing Vlad, but the Sultan himself withdrew with the main army. The most powerful military force in the world had invaded a tiny principality with overwhelming numbers and been turned back, not by military defeat, but by sheer psychological warfare. Vlad the Impaler had won. But the story does not end there, because what comes next reveals the ultimate tragedy, that terror, however effective in the short term, always devours its wielder in the end. You would think that turning back the mighty Ottoman Empire, an act of almost unimaginable defiance, would cement Vlad's legacy as an undisputed hero across Christian Europe. And in some ways, briefly, it did. The Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, and even the distant pope, praised his audacious defense of Christendom, hailing him as a valiant bulwark against the encroaching tide of Islam. But here is the chilling truth they failed to grasp, or perhaps refused to acknowledge. Vlad could not turn it off. The terror, once unleashed, could not be contained. The brutal methods that had, with horrific effectiveness, defeated the superior Ottoman forces did not cease with their retreat. They continued. They intensified. He used them on everyone. By late 1462, mere months after his greatest triumph, the paranoia and ruthlessness ingrained in his psyche consumed him entirely. He began impaling Wallachian merchants, not for treason, but for something as mundane as price gouging. Boyars suspected of disloyalty, based on mere rumors, whispers, or perceived slights, met the same gruesome fate. Entire villages, for what he deemed minor infractions or a lack of absolute obedience, were put to the stake. The tool he had forged to defeat an overwhelming external enemy had become his only tool, his universal solution for everything, every problem, every dissent, every perceived threat, real or imagined. His political position, once bolstered by the incredible victory against Mehmed, began to deteriorate with alarming speed. The very people he ruled, who had endured his scorched earth tactics and devastating night raids against the Ottomans, now found themselves facing the same terror. Fear of a foreign invader was replaced by a more insidious, pervasive dread of their own prince. His younger brother, Radu, the one who had adapted to life among the Ottomans, who had even befriended Sultan Mehmed, now re-emerged onto the scene. Backed by Ottoman gold and soldiers, Radu positioned himself as the sane, reasonable alternative, a ruler who would bring stability and an end to the ceaseless, arbitrary brutality. The contrast was stark and appealing to a populace exhausted by terror. Hungarian support, once crucial to Vlad's rise and his recent victory, evaporated as his increasingly erratic and savage behavior alienated his allies. King Matthias Corvinus, who had lauded him as a defender of the faith, began to see him as a dangerous, unstable liability, an uncontrollable force that threatened the delicate balance of power in the region. By November 1462, just months after routing the most powerful army in the world, Vlad was forced to flee Wallachia. He sought refuge in Hungarian territory, only to find himself in the bitter embrace of irony. He was imprisoned by his supposed ally, King Matthias, on charges that remain murky to this day. Some historical sources suggest Matthias fabricated letters, making it appear as though Vlad was secretly negotiating with the Ottomans. Others contend that Vlad had simply become such a political and diplomatic pariah that even his Christian allies wanted him gone, contained, neutralized. He spent the next 12 years in Hungarian captivity. This was not the brutal, psychologically tormenting imprisonment of his Ottoman youth, however. Instead, it was more akin to house arrest, lived in relatively comfortable quarters. He was permitted to socialize, to study, even to practice falconry. During this period, he married a Hungarian noblewoman and fathered children. By all accounts, he appeared to be a model prisoner, quiet, compliant, seemingly subdued. Yet, one must wonder what was truly simmering beneath that composed facade. What dark thoughts continued to fester in the mind that had once orchestrated a forest of human suffering? Then, in 1476, opportunity returned, a cruel twist of fate for the now weakened Wallachia. The principality had devolved into absolute chaos under a succession of weak and ineffective rulers, a stark contrast to Vlad's iron-fisted, albeit terrifying control. Wallachia, vulnerable and unstable, was ripe for the taking. Moldavia's ambitious prince Stephen the Great, a powerful figure in his own right, helped orchestrate Vlad's return to the throne.
Backed by a combined force of Hungarian and Moldavian troops, the imprisoned prince, now aged 45 tuổi, reclaimed his ancestral throne in November 1476. The Dark Prince was back. He had perhaps 2 months to rule, 2 final months to once again taste the power he so craved, before his ultimate, ignominious end. In December 1476 hoặc perhaps early January 1477, the precise date, like so many details of his life, is lost to the swirling mists of history. Vlad met his end. He was killed in battle, fighting against an Ottoman force near Bucharest. The circumstances surrounding his death are as murky and contentious as his life. Some sources claim he was killed by his own men, either through outright treachery or because, in the chaotic maelstrom of battle, they mistook him for an enemy soldier. Others assert he was simply overwhelmed by the superior numbers of the Ottoman soldiers, falling in a final, desperate stand. What is certain, however, is the grim aftermath. His head was severed from his body, a macabre trophy. It was then preserved, likely in honey, and dispatched to Sultan Mehmed in Constantinople as irrefutable proof of death. After everything, the terror, the impalements, the psychological warfare that had shattered an army, Vlad ended up as a gruesome exhibit, his head displayed for mockery in the capital of the very empire he had fought with every fiber of his being, his entire brutal life. His body, legend claims, was interred at Snagov Monastery, nestled on an island in Romania. Excavations conducted in the 1930s did indeed find a tomb there, but it was empty. To this very day, the actual resting place of Vlad's remains a profound mystery, a fittingly enigmatic end for such a notorious figure. So, what do we do with this story? How do we, centuries later, process the legacy of such a man? In Romania, Vlad is often celebrated, his image carefully burnished into that of a national hero, a brutal, yes, but ultimately effective leader who stood against overwhelming odds and, for a time, preserved his country's independence. There are statues erected in his honor. His stern face, a symbol of defiance, appears on tourist merchandise, a testament to his complex, dualistic role in Romanian national identity. To the rest of the world, however, especially after Bram Stoker's influential 1897 novel Dracula loosely borrowed his name and a sliver of his history, Vlad became synonymous with vampirism and supernatural evil.
This transformation into a fictional monster, in a perverse way, lets us off the hook. It is easier, far more comfortable, to think of him as an inhuman creature, a purely evil entity beyond the realm of human understanding, than to confront the true horror. Because the real horror is this: everything Vlad did was human.
Painfully, terrifyingly, undeniably human. He was not born a monster, a creature of the night. He was created. He was forged by a system that taught him from a tender age that true power comes only through terror. That survival in a world of constant betrayal and shifting loyalties demanded absolute ruthlessness. That empathy was not a virtue, but a fatal weakness. And he took those brutal lessons, absorbed them into the very marrow of his being, and refined them to their most logical, most extreme, most terrifying conclusion. The forest of the impaled was not an act of madness. It was applied psychology, a calculated demonstration of ultimate dominion over life and death. The night attacks were not random acts of violence. They were precision military strategy, designed to break morale and sow chaos. Every impalement, every mutilation, every public display of prolonged suffering was a calculated move in a larger, deadlier game.
And here is what should keep you awake at night, what should truly haunt you. It worked. Against impossible odds, using nothing but meticulously calculated terror, Vlad turned back an empire. He proved unequivocally that fear, properly weaponized, could accomplish what conventional armies, even the most powerful on earth, could not. The question then is not whether Vlad was evil. That is obvious, a given. The deeper, more disturbing question is this: what does it say about human nature that this method, this systematic application of terror and suffering, was so profoundly effective? And what other calculated horrors are hiding in history's shadows, waiting to teach us lessons we would rather not learn? Lessons about the depths of human cruelty and the unsettling effectiveness of fear. If you want to keep uncovering the uncomfortable truths that textbooks often bury, the stories that challenge our understanding of good and evil, then listen closely.
Because history's darkest chapters are not just about what happened, they are about understanding why it worked. And that truly is the knowledge we cannot afford to forget. The echoes of Vlad's reign did not merely fade with his death. They resonated across generations, reshaping the very landscape of Wallachia and influencing the broader political currents of Eastern Europe for decades. Though his tenure was brief, his impact was indelible. The old boyar class, the perennial source of instability and betrayal, had been effectively dismantled, replaced by a new, loyal, albeit terrified, nobility hand-picked by Vlad himself. This dramatic shift in the internal power structure created a more centralized, albeit ruthlessly governed state. Yet the cost was immeasurable. Wallachia, a land that had once been relatively prosperous, was left scarred, its population traumatized, its economy in tatters from the scorched earth policies and the constant fear.
The psychological tone on the populace was profound. A generation grew up understanding that defiance meant unimaginable suffering, and that safety lay only in absolute, unquestioning obedience. This ingrained fear, a dark inheritance, shaped the collective consciousness of Wallachians for centuries, influencing their relationship with authority and their perception of power. Vlad's legacy, too, became a powerful and enduring symbol. To the Ottomans, he was Kazikli Bey, the Impaler Prince, a figure of awe and dread, a testament to an enemy capable of matching, even exceeding, their own capacity for strategic brutality. His tactics forced a re-evaluation within the Ottoman military leadership. They understood that conventional might alone could not always conquer a mind bent on such extreme forms of psychological warfare. The encounter with Vlad left an imprint, a cautionary tale about the unpredictable nature of absolute terror.
In the West, however, Vlad's story mutated, evolving from historical accounts into something mythological. The German pamphlets, with their graphic woodcuts of impalement and tales of dining among the dying, spread like wildfire. They captivated a Europe hungry for sensationalism and reinforced a burgeoning sense of European identity against the perceived barbarity of the East. Over time, as the direct historical context faded, Vlad the Impaler became less a historical figure and more a boogeyman, a personification of ultimate evil. It was this distorted, demonized image that Bram Stoker would later encounter and, with artistic license, transform into Count Dracula. Stoker, researching folklore and history, found in Vlad's macabre reputation the perfect antagonist for his gothic horror novel. The real Vlad, the man of flesh and blood, became a shadowy inspiration for a supernatural entity, a vampire who fed on blood rather than fear. This literary appropriation, while immortalizing his name, also further obscured the historical truth, turning a complex, terrifying human being into a romanticized, albeit monstrous myth. And this, perhaps, is the greatest danger in how we remember Vlad. By casting him as a supernatural monster, we inadvertently absolve ourselves of the uncomfortable truth that he was, at his core, human. His actions, however unspeakable, were born not of demonic possession, but of human trauma, human strategic thought, and human depravity. He was a product of his time, yes, a brutal era of constant warfare and political intrigue, but he pushed the boundaries of that brutality to an extreme that shocked even his contemporaries. His story compels us to confront difficult questions about the nature of power, survival, and morality. Was he a patriot, fiercely defending his small principality against a massive empire, using the only tools he believed would work? Or was he a psychopath, whose early trauma merely provided the justification for an inherent, monstrous cruelty? The truth is likely far more nuanced, a terrifying blend of both. Vlad's life serves as a stark, chilling reminder that the line between calculated strategy and monstrous cruelty can blur, especially when one is taught, as he was, that empathy is a weakness and terror is the ultimate tool of control. He demonstrated that fear, when systematically applied, can be an incredibly potent weapon, capable of achieving seemingly impossible victories. But he also exemplified its inherent tragic flaw. Terror, once wielded, is nearly impossible to put down. It consumes the wielder as surely as it consumes the victim, warping their humanity and isolating them in a fortress of their own making. His final years, fleeing from former allies, dying in murky circumstances, his head a trophy for the very enemy he so viciously fought, underscore this tragic irony. The man who mastered the art of psychological warfare ultimately became a victim of the very forces he unleashed: paranoia, isolation, and the relentless cycle of violence. His physical remains are lost, but his psychological legacy persists, a ghost in the annals of history, whispering warnings about the seductive, destructive power of fear. So, when we remember Vlad the Impaler, we must look beyond the fictional fangs and the capes. We must stare unflinchingly at the human truth, a broken boy hardened by captivity and betrayal, who learned the darkest lessons of empire and refined them into an art form of suffering. His story is not just a tale of historical horror,
It is a profound, disturbing meditation on the human capacity for cruelty, the devastating effectiveness of terror, and the enduring, inescapable truth that even the most formidable weapons eventually turn on their creators. This knowledge, chilling though it may be, is crucial.
It is the lesson we cannot afford to forget, lest we find ourselves or our societies once again walking into a forest of fear.